Here is a quote from Louisa's early novel, Lady and the Woman, where she discusses on her ideas of marriage. Eligible Edward Windsor claims that the style of woman he most admires are those such as claim our protection and support, giving us in return affection and obedience, beautiful and tender creatures, submissive to our will, confident in our judgment, and lenient to our faults, to be cherished in sunshine and sheltered in storms. Kate Loring, a young woman of 24, with no pretensions to beauty, who has raised her 4 orphan brothers, replies, "You have given your idol a heart, but no head. I would have her humble, though self-reliant, gentle, true strong, man's companion, not his plaything, able and willing to face storms, as well as sunshines, and share life's burdens as they come." Louise was part of the women's movement that developed into the first wave of feminism. One of the moving powers of this movement was to encourage people to marry for love instead of money. Most marriages of the time were made because of financial reasons. In Little Woman, Mommy says to the sisters that she would rather see them married to poor men and be happy than unhappily with rich men. All the marriages in Little Woman, in one way or another, are wrapped around this idea that love is connected to self-reliancy. It is a very Christian idea of marriage, the idea that you build something better together with your significant other. I usually try to avoid politics and religion in all of my podcasts, but because Louisa May Alcott was a Christian and it had a big impact on her worldview, this is one of the things where I make an exception. When Louisa was in her early 20s, she considered marrying for money to help out her family. In Little Woman, this element is given to Amy, and a lot of people think that this makes Amy a social climber. I don't think that was Louisa's intention. The book Amy considers marrying Fred won't because she wants to lift her family away from poverty. She's not thrilled about the idea. She sees it as her duty. Sometimes I wonder if the people who criticize Amy for marrying Laurie, who is rich but not as rich as Fred, but still wealthy, would they be as quick to criticize Jo if she had married Laurie? The cause of the whole argument is the lack of Laurie's character arc in the adaptations. In the 19th century, despite of the desire to work, women's work areas were limited. There was some factory work, but often women would work as maids or governess or tutors. Amy writes in her letters that if the artist career doesn't take off, one of the options is to come back home to Concord and work as an art teacher. Both Jo and Amy, they had very similar ideas about wanting to become wealthy for the wrong reasons. Marrying a rich man and to support your family that way. It seems almost too easy, but in the long run, that kind of thing could ruin your life. Jo thought that writing sensational stories would be easy money, and it almost cost her her mental health. Amy's moment of clarity comes when Laurie reminds her that she should not sacrifice her own happiness and that her family would not definitely support that kind of decision. And through this, Amy is reminded of her values and the way she was raised. I have talked bits about Laddie Wisniewski, who was one of the models for Laurie. Lisa met Laddie in Switzerland when she was working there. It is still a bit unclear why he was there in the first place. Maybe he was taking care of his health. According to Louisa, he had tuberculosis and she was nursing him. He was very flirtatious with Louisa. Then he allegedly proposed to Louisa's employee, Anna Weld, who did not react well, and Laddie was kicked out from the premises. Anna Weld was a very wealthy woman, which has led some Alcott scholars speculate that Ladislas was after her money.
Hello friends, it is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
For the angry Laurie fans who are listening to this, I think the part of Laurie chasing Jo is what comes from this encounter with Lady Wisniewski, and rest of it probably comes from Goethe. About 10 years after the publication of Little Woman, Louisa's publisher had sent a check to Lady Wisniewski, and Louisa and Ladislav, they had not met each other after they had met in Europe. Why was Louisa giving him money? These are all theories. Ladislav had got married and he had children, and he needed the money to support them. Louisa loved kids, and she was happy to help. Second scenario, he was blackmailing money from Louisa, threatening to go to the press and tell about their time together in Europe. Laddie was 10, 11 years younger than Louisa. That would have been quite a scandal. I don't know which scenario is the truth, but I do know that Louisa's sister May also knew Laddie, and they had actually lived in Paris at the same time. But May wasn't a huge fan of him, and it seems that Louisa got fed up with him as well. They describe him boring, and that he never pays his debt back. Money that Louisa gave him. Maybe May had also given him money that he never paid back. One of the biggest crimes that the adaptations do is that they make it seem that Amy and Joe are arguing over Laurie. In the book, Joe never wants him, and Amy doesn't want him either when he's being lazy and unproductive. In an article called Happy Woman, which Louisa wrote about a year after Little Woman was published, Louisa writes that accepting a false idea of love just because you are lonely is self-deceiving. Isn't this what happens in Little Woman? Joe considers Laurie's proposal because she is lonely. Perhaps the reason why Louisa rejected Lady Wisniewski was because she was still in love with Henry Thoreau. Henry, like all the transcendentalists, believed in self-reliancy. I think the best way to describe Henry's relationship with money is that he was a minimalist. He also came from a working class. His father had a pencil factory where Henry worked time to time. He was also a teacher and occasionally a gardener, a hunter, and a naturalist, and a writer. And of course, Henry was a transcendentalist philosopher like Friedrich. In Little Woman's saga, Henry is constantly present, especially in Little Man. Louisa describes his love for simplicity when she writes about Friedrich's love for the natural world. In the 19th century, some religious parties considered the transcendentalist heretic because they almost had a pantheistic belief that nature was the most perfect expression of God. One of my observant book readers said that if Friedrich was based on someone who Louisa was in love with, that explains why she was frustrated by the fans who were demanding her to marry Joe to Laurie. Louisa never really liked Little Woman. She considered it as one of her worst novels. I think the observant blog reader is right. Louisa wrote a lot about herself, and therefore success of Little Woman would create very conflicted feelings. Me and my friend Emily talked about this in our Laurie episode. In the 19th century, Laurie was a super popular character, and perhaps one part of that popularity was because he was wealthy. Every time when Louisa was asked about the real life Laurie, she would always speak very highly about Laddie to the public, but then in her private letters she was not so happy with him. So why is Fredrik poor? He is poor because he chose equal, and therefore they share their similar views on self-reliancy and can build their life together. This is what Louisa writes in the Umbrella chapter. Friedrich says, I could not find the heart to take you from that happy home until I could have a prospect of one to give you. After much time, perhaps, and hard work, how could I ask you to give up so much for a poor old fellow who has no fortune but little learning? I am glad you are poor. I couldn't bear a rich husband, said Joe decidedly, adding, in a softer tone, don't fear poverty. I've known it long enough to lose my dread and be happy working for those I love. And don't call yourself old. 40 is the prime of life. I couldn't help loving you if you were 70. Side note here. In Joe's Boys, which is the last Little Woman book, Joe and Fredrik are making out and he's 70. Book that was Louisa's personal favorite was Moods, which is a story that she began to write when she was 17, and she revisited it several times during her life. If you want to read about Louisa's and Henry's relationship, Moods is pretty explicit, and Joe's and Fredrik's age difference in the book is 16 years, which was also Henry's and Louisa's age difference. When it comes to the adaptations, they don't usually pay that much attention to wealth and class. Laurie's missing character art is a prime example of that. That Fritz is poor or not is often pretty vague. Same with him being an immigrant. For example, in Greta Gerwig's film, there was an earlier script where Friedrich was written to be German and Joe's father get a speech of USA being built upon immigrants, which is true, but then in the final script and in the final film, Friedrich is vaguely European and the part about immigrants was turned into a joke. The only film where Friedrich clearly poor is the 1994 film. Gabriel Byrne's clothes in the film, they look really nice, but they don't look new. The 1978 series is the only adaptation which shows that Friedrich is applying jobs after Joe's return to Concord, and there is a scene where he gets the job and he's building courage to travel to Concord and tell about it to Joe. But the musical is probably the best when it shows that not only Fritz has a good effect on Joe and her writing, but she has a positive effect on him and his life in a more wider sense. I will quote you Henry's poem called Friendship. When under a kindred shape, like loves and hates, and a kindred nature, proclaim us to be mates, exposed to equal fates, eternally, and each may other help, and service do, drawing love's bands more tight, service he near shall rue, while one and one make two, and two are one. In such case only, clothed man, fully prove, fully as man can do, what power there is in love, his inmost soul to move, resistlessly. Based on some of Louisa's diary markings from the time when she was in her early 20s, it would seem that one of her dreams was to start a school with Henry, where she would be the boy's mother and he would be the teacher. Henry passed away in 1862. Quite soon after that, Louisa registered to work as a nurse in the war. We can fairly say that these events are connected. This idea of school reappears in Little Woman. One of Louisa's friends, Elizabeth Powell, and her husband, they seem to have been models for Joe and Friedrich. Like Joe and Fritz, they even had 2 sons together. Elizabeth also became one of the first female deans of a university. Another model for Joe and Fritz were a couple who Louisa greatly admired, Eliza and Charles Follen. Now, Charles Follen was a German immigrant. He was really good friends with Louisa's uncle, Samuel May, and one of the early figures of transcendentalism. Charles died in an accident, and Eliza wrote a book about him and their marriage. You don't only see this couple's influence on Little Woman, but also in countless of Louisa May Alcott's novels. Louisa had a habit to self-insert herself and people she knew into the books that she read. Charles was almost a legendary figure among the transcendentalists. Louisa basically grew up hearing stories about him. Charles was a hardcore abolitionist, a revolutionist educator, and he was from, you guessed it, Berlin. Charles was a political refugee. When I now read Little Woman, a part of me believes that Friedrich was a political refugee who was fighting against the oppressors. May I tell you, Little Woman fans who like to spend their times meditating on Friedrich's character, like yours truly, are often very interested on the different philosophical movements of the past. I have few friends who I sometimes talk about Friedrich's childhood and his past relationships before he met Joe. If we think about Henry Thoreau and then Charles Follen, I don't know if they ever met, but Henry would have known about him because all transcendentalists knew about Charles Follen. They were both intellectuals, but they both had a rebellious side, a very strong sense of social justice. Both Amy and Joe, they grew up in a family where both parents were always helping the poor. And the both sisters knew what it was like to be poor. Laurie, he can never be Joe's partner because he doesn't have the mental capacity to support her writing career. It doesn't mean that Laurie is stupid. It's just not something that he's interested or that he knows a lot about. He's not either very grounded, so he can't really run a school with Joe, but everything works out great for him because Amy is very grounded. When Joe sees him for the first time, he's helping this little servant girl who is carrying a heavy bucket of coal. One of the better parts of the 2017 series is the line where Friedrich says that it pains his heart to see a child suffer. Beside their love for books and Goethe and philosophy, Joe and Friedrich, they also share similar views on anti-slavery and child labor, and also on education. And when we think about all these people who Louisa inserted into Joe's and Friedrich's characters, Charles, Eliza, Henry, Louisa herself, they are all connected by this level of rebellionism and the refusal to conform to the regulations of the society. How amazing is that? Thank you for listening.